Hey, Alchemil here, founder of Rosen Rogues, and today we're covering a kind of important topic, if not a little bit technical, and that's how to get Alembic particles into Cinema4D and Blender. So for this tutorial, I'm using Embergen, but this is going to work with any Alembic file you get from any other program. So even if you're using Houdini or something else, stick around for the tutorial. Now, if you're here because you have a free month of Embergen due to maybe a recent 3D competition by a certain YouTuber, or because you've signed up for the trial period, whatever reason you're here, I'm so glad you're watching this video. Now, if this tutorial helps you and you end up getting Embergen afterward, there's a link in the description down below that if you click on it and then go buy Embergen, I get a little bit of a kickback. And that means a lot to me. It makes making these a little bit more worth it, and just also shows me that I'm actually helping out Django Effects, who I love. They have a great team, and I can't be more happy with everything they've been doing and the way they run their company. If you want to support them while also supporting me, that's the best way to do it. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into Embergen and get our Alembic files ready. All right, here we are in a pretty standard Embergen scene. Now, if you're already confused, if you're looking at this crazy nodes and all this other stuff, and you're like, what? I have no idea what any of this stuff is. Don't worry, I already have an Embergen beginner's guide that teaches you how to get everything set up and goes over particle emitters, volume emitters, as well as just getting your bearings in the program. So I'd highly recommend checking out that. If you want to do something more specific, my flamethrower tutorial is how to create like a flamethrower or like Dragon's Breath or something. And then the most recent tutorial will teach you about parenting and go over some new features in Embergen 1.1. So now that you have your bearings though, and seeing as you're an expert, you have your particle emitter, it's emitting particles the way you want, and you want to figure out how the heck to get these into the program of your choice. It's pretty easy. You simply just go to the particles node, drag out from the particle output, and then click export particles. This is going to give you an option of the directory you want, how many frames, all this other stuff. So I'm just going to do the first frames, do absolute frames, so that way it's going to count up from 0 no matter which frame I choose. My first frame is going to be 300 because I don't want it starting at 0. I want it starting with particles already on screen, and that's when this animation loops. And the number of frames I want to be 300 as well. You can export whatever you want, whether it's colors or densities or any of these things, depending on what kind of controls your program you're exporting to, will tell you what's going on with these. You can also choose the coordinate system. So up, left-handed or right-handed. The only thing you really have to be careful about is if you're doing left-handed or right-handed, because if you have something like this with a curve, it will invert it. So it won't exactly work the way you think it will, or look the way you think it will, depending on which one of those you have chosen. The physics will be going the wrong way, essentially. So now that you have all that done, simply choose your directory and hit export. I've already exported this, so let's get into our programs. So we're going to start in Blender, because whether you're using Cinema4D or using Blender, you're going to end up having to start in Blender anyway. So that will make more sense in a second. But if you're a C4D user, feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp marked C4D, and I'll meet you there. But for all of you Blender bros, let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to drag out. I hate this system, guys. Like, why is this the way it is? This is why I'm a Cinema4D user. Don't at me. Anyway, so now that I have this dragged out, I'm going to go to Geometry Node Editor and just have that be ready. Then I'm going to go over to File. We're going to go to Import Alembic. And I might just call them ABCs for now on because that's a little bit easier for me. Go to your destination, wherever you have it, and grab your image, your sequence. This Alembic sequence is not always going to be the case. Sometimes you get just a single Alembic file. This will work for that. But if it is a sequence, make sure you check is sequence for House Blender. All right, and then you hit import. As you can see, it's kind of coming in sideways. No big deal. I can rotate it around if we need to. But I'm not too worried about that because I'm not going to be doing the whole thing here. So now we have our particles, and if I check, yep, they're playing. Okay, so now you have your particles and they're in the right position. Let's render it. Oh wait, nothing's happening, right? We have a light in the scene, but you can tell it's not affecting it at all. So what's the deal? Well, the problem is these are just vertex points. That's how Blender imports Alembic files. So what we need to do is figure out how to turn them into something usable. Now you could map stuff onto the vertex points, right? Just like you could with any model. Or what you can simply do is go to your geometry nodes, hit new, and then simply go to add mesh, and then mesh to points. And as soon as you add that in, voila, you get this amazing output, which is now being affected by our lights. And now you can see it's all working nice. So there's all sorts of ways to customize these particles and to make them glow or to do whatever you want, but I'm not covering that in this tutorial. This tutorial is simply just how to get them from there to here. So now that you have that, feel free to look up whatever other tutorial you want for the Blender users out there that know way more than me in how to get that looking pretty. So if you're a Blender user, that's pretty much the tutorial, right? We've gone into Blender and it's successful. However, before you go, check out the rest of the channel. We got some interesting stuff over here, not just tutorials. Tutorials are where it starts. I totally get that. You need to know how to use your programs in order to make art. But once you have the base knowledge, how do you make your art good or interesting? And then maybe how do you make stuff that isn't just for a boss or a client? That's where the rest of the channel is. So if you're someone that always wanted to be a filmmaker, well then welcome to the DFU, the Digital Filmmaking Underground. The Digital Filmmaking Underground is simply a underground movement, just like comic books or punk rock. There needs to be an alternative space where individuals, small teams, can make their own art for audiences that isn't just the mainstream. We all became visual effects people, artists, modelers, designers, motion designers, because we wanted to make art, because we wanted to make something creative for an audience, not because we wanted to work for some corporation. I think all the tools and resources are there for an underground filmmaking movement, in particular a digital one. And that's what the rest of the channel is for. We ourselves are making a short film that we're hoping to lead the way with, but I'm also interviewing other people that have already done it or are doing it. I'm also talking about theory and what makes good stories or bad stories. And we also have a live stream every Friday, more or less, where Rob, our producer, and I talk about just kind of the higher concepts and give you guys updates on our short film as they come. So if you check out any of that other content, I would greatly appreciate it. There's something there for everybody. Maybe I'll even see you in a live stream one of these days. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, for all my C4D family, you've skipped ahead and I've been waiting for you. Took you long enough. And now step one for getting your Alembic files into Cinema4D is to open Blender. I'm not kidding. So I know what you're thinking. Why am I opening Blender if this is a Cinema4D tutorial? Well, the reason why is Cinema4D can't really import Alembic files that are in a sequence. It can import an animated Alembic file, but not a sequenced file. There is a workaround though, using Python and some coding. And if you're not too scared, I'll show you how to do that after this. But this would be my recommended workflow. So you go to Blender, and then you're going to go to import Alembic file. So you're going to go find wherever your Alembic files are, and then find the first frame of that sequence, or the first file of that sequence. And then you want to check is sequence. This is a very useful button that I wish Cinema4D had, but it doesn't, and so we're in Blender. Hit import Alembic, double check it plays, it does, and then rotate it or change whatever you need to change to get it looking the way it should. All right, now that it all looks good, we're just going to select our particles, file, export, and Alembic. And we're going to be out of Blender in no time. Find out wherever you want to save these. I'm going to save it in Blender here, and then name it whatever it needs to be named. We're going to call this waterfall. You can look over these settings here. They're not super important. You want to hit export particles is the big one, but that should be checked by default. And then you're going to hit export. It's going to play through it and export all of your frames. Once it's done rendering all the frames, we can leave Blender and get back to the safety of our user-friendly UI. Now that we're back in a user interface with buttons, all the buttons, let's go over and merge our project. Go to the file where you've exported your single Alembic file, hit open. You can have all this pretty much default. It's going to read it as is. Instances work fine. Render instances is fine. You know, you can pretty much leave this at default. Your scale is going to depend on the scale of your scene, but it should all just work. So now that you've imported it, you can see right away we have our Alembic file. And if I hit play, it plays. That's what more could you ask for? So now we have our playing file here. How do we actually see this? How do we make it visible? Because by default, you're not going to see anything. Well, what we need to do is tell it what these points are. Right now, it's looking at these points as simply vertexes. So they're just points with no geometry between them. So what you can do is go to your particles. Oh, it's bringing in the light from Blender. We don't need that. In fact, we'll make our own light. So now we have our own light and we have our particles. How do we tell this Cinema4D what this is? Well, there's a few ways to do this, but the easiest is to simply go up to your Redshift, if you're using Redshift, which you probably are if you're using Cinema4D because it comes with it, and then go to Objects, Matrix Scatter. Now that you have a matrix scatter, it's going to put them all over here. What you simply do is choose Object for your object, drop in your particles, and then under Distribution, instead of Surface, choose Vertex. And boom, you can see we have all these little boxes. So there's a few things you can do to make this easier for you, because this is all a bunch of squares. You can turn off the view in the viewport, so that way you're just seeing the dots again, and you're not seeing the squares. And then if you want to see the dots under your Redshift tag, go to Point Instances. You can choose whichever one of these. Optimized Spheres works fine. Point Instances works fine. And then you can change the scale. So now if I bring in my render view again, and now if I hit render, you should be seeing all of our particles. They're probably a little big, so what we can do is change the scale multiplier to 0.1, and now they look like particles. And there you have it. There we have our rain. And if we play through, you can kind of see it works. One more tip just for fun. Now that you have this in here, if you want to have these look kind of cool, there's a cool tip somebody gave us recently, which is simply grab a new material, throw it on there, under your shader graph, drop everything pretty much off, you know, save yourself the samples. Go all the way down to emission, turn the emission up to something ridiculous like 12. And then what you want to do is grab the opacity and then drop that down. And what that's going to do is kind of give you a really nice looking particles that that kind of multiply, right? They have an additive. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. They have an additive effect. So by doing that, now when they layer on top of each other, you see them through each other. And we choose something like a blue, let's say, as more and more layer, they get whiter, right? So the ones that aren't super layered are going to be just straight blue, but the ones that are layered are going to turn to white. And that gives you this really kind of cool effect that plays well with, you know, your bloom and whatnot. All right, so you kind of get that cool glowy trapcode particular look. So that's how you bring your particles in the easy way. Now the hard way. Okay, so this way is a little more tricky, but if you for some reason refuse to use Blender, if you absolutely hate Blender and you want to do particles anyway, here's how you do that. I'm going to get rid of our particles and our scatter here, and let's do it the hard way. So the hard way includes some coding. And what I'm going to do is grab a preset I've made called Alembic Sequence and drag it in. Then what you're going to want to do is go to your file, merge project, same as before, find out where you've hidden these things, waterfall, and there's your image sequence, right? And you're going to hit open. And then you're going to hit OK. Now, what's cool about this is you can already see it's importing them as particles, right? And this is only really useful if you absolutely have to have them as thinking particles and not as vertex points. The vertex points works fine, and there's actually some kind of cool stuff you can do with the vertex points, which I might also show you at the end here. But they all come through as points. So what you want to do is going to go to Simulate, Thinking Particles, and Thinking Particles Settings. I have never used this window up until this one tutorial in my life. I've never thought about it. If you don't like the looks of these ticks, just change them to dots. And now it actually kind of looks like particles. So now what? How do we actually see this stuff? Well, the next thing you're going to want to do is, just like before, create your Redshift objects matrix scatter, and then go down to custom object. Now here's the tricky part. You would think your custom object that you want here should be the particles like before, and you just drag that in. That doesn't work. Don't ask me why it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Instead, what you have to grab is the particle group from your particle system and drop it there. And that is going to give you this workaround. So there's one problem here, and that is that this doesn't animate. It's static. And that's because Cinema4D only views the first part of this sequence. It only sees the first file. It doesn't go to the rest automatically. Even if you have use animation checked, it won't go and find the rest of these files and update the path. So what we're going to have to do is manually tell Cinema, hey, here's where the path is. And we're going to do that with some code. So this code was written by John Lee Seibert. Give him a check out at his website. But I'll have this in the Gumroad just because it took me a bit to find this. The link is kind of dead right now on his website. I don't know if he knows that, but if it is, then just go to the Gumroad and do it. Full credit though to him. I didn't write this. So we're going to select this, and then we're going to go to our tag and file setup. We want both of those selected. And if you look down here, we have the path. So same thing as before, just find your path, select the first file and hit open. And then what you're going to want to do is delete, or not delete, I would use cut the last part here, right? So you just want it to go to the main folder that all of the sequence is in. So in the next field, you're going to paste that whole thing you cut from the top field, right? The name and the number and the extension. What you're going to want to do is then cut the number and the extension and just end at the final part before the first number. If you include the number, this is going to break. So just have just the file name without the sequence number. Then under file extension, paste that last part and get rid of the number. So just ABC. This is probably going to be already filled out for you. So now that you have all that working out the way it should, you can go back to your particles. It should have everything correct. So now that we got this all linked and working on the preset, you're going to want to move it to your imported particles. And the reason for this is, I don't know why, but the thinking particles are really finicky, and they like to attach only if you've imported it, but then they won't attach here. It won't create one if you just use my project file, right? It won't have a particle group. If you open up your thinking particles, you'll notice there's no particle group there. And so what you're going to want to do is drag this to your original particles that are linked to this particle group and delete this old one. And now if we did everything right, if we have this just perfect and have this just perfect, if I hit play, it will update every single frame. It's going to play back slower than it would if I had done this right the first time. Looking at this, original particles being wherever they are, and it doesn't work if you just turn off visibility, because again, they're thinking particles. So what you have to do instead is come over here to the view type under your thinking particles tab, and then hit none, right? And then now you won't see it rendered in your viewport. But after that, everything else should work more or less the same. As we covered before. The last thing is, if you want to move this at all or rotate or whatever, it'll seem like it works, but then if you move a frame, it'll reset and it won't have changed. So what you'll want to do there is where it says stretch and behavior thinking particles, you have to change it to standard thinking particles, which for some reason makes the preview way, way larger. I don't know why. It just does. And then what you can do is actually reposition it and it'll stay there. However you need it to be repositioned. So That's cool, and that should more or less, if I bring this back over, test it out, that should more or less get everything working. Oh, and then it made them way bigger as well, so I'm going to have to go like factor of 10 here. There we go. So now they're dots again, and then you can just apply whatever texture you want. I'm sure there's a way of making the matrix objects look smaller, like the squares, and you know, everything else. Like I don't know why this is so hard in Cinema, but that's currently the workaround I've found to actually get this to kind of behave somewhat normally. So it works. I mean, it's cool that it works, but it's such a weird workaround when, like Blender, you can just drag and drop it in. If for some reason you need it to be thinking particles, you might work for you. I found it to be a pain in the butt to work with. I find it doesn't update correctly. It constantly wants to reset on me. You know, it's not fun to work with it this way, but if you need it to, for whatever reason, it's an option. If you're like stuck against the wall and this is the only thing that's going to save your butt by keeping them as particles, then that's how you do that. Do it the other way. Use vertex points. It's far easier and simpler. And that's that for the Cinema4D side of this tutorial. However, before you go, check out the rest of the channel. We got some interesting stuff over here, not just tutorials. Tutorials are where it starts. I totally get that. You need to know how to use your programs in order to make art. But once you have the base knowledge, how do you make your art good or interesting? And then maybe how do you make stuff that isn't just for a boss or a client? That's where the rest of the channel is. So if you're someone that always wanted to be a filmmaker, well then welcome to the DFU, the Digital Filmmaking Underground. The Digital Filmmaking Underground is simply a underground movement, just like comic books or punk rock. There needs to be an alternative space where individuals, small teams, can make their own art for audiences that isn't just the mainstream. We all became visual effects people, artists, modelers, designers, motion designers, because we wanted to make art, because we wanted to make something creative for an audience, not because we wanted to work for some corporation. I think all the tools and resources are there for an underground filmmaking movement, in particular a digital one. And that's what the rest of the channel is for. We ourselves are making a short film that we're hoping to lead the way with, but I'm also interviewing other people that have already done it or are doing it. I'm also talking about theory and what makes good stories or bad stories. And we also have a live stream every Friday, more or less, where Rob, our producer, and I talk about just kind of the higher concepts and give you guys updates on our short film as they come. So if you check out any of that other content, I would greatly appreciate it. There's something there for everybody. Maybe I'll even see you in a live stream one of these days. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.